Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone to the first session of our second cycle in the Pushing the Boundaries community of practice. We're so happy that you're all here. The first cycle focused on theories of change for transformative public innovation. And this cycle we're diving into, we kept trying to find a better name. Maybe by the end of today, one of you will have a great name for us. Currently called the inner and outer work of transformation inside the public sector. So you're here in the first of 3 sessions, and we'll share links and things to connect in with all the work that's happened before and what is to come in the slide deck. But for now, please feel welcomed and settle in for what will be a great conversation. We've got skillful, loving guides with us in Penny Hagen, who is in Auckland this morning, and Lily Raphael, who is usually in Vancouver, British Columbia, but is on the move today. So they're guiding us through this great session. There'll be conversation with one another, learning from some special guests, lots of time for reflection. And I think before I hand it over to Lily, I just wanted to say that pushing the boundaries is an intentionally open, exploratory, kind of ambiguous, means different things to each of us. We're not trying to pin anything down or make any decisions. So we invite you to really just come with that open, exploratory mind. And we just feel like as practitioners, as your co-hosting team, there's lots to be asking ourselves at this point in time about what it means to be doing public sector innovation work, and can we be more ambitious about that? For me, ambitious means moving and innovations that are working toward social and ecological justice, well-being, liberation in some way, and that means it'll mean different things to each of us, but that's sort of the spark that is behind this gathering and this community of practice, and we're really excited that you've joined us all. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Lily, to take us on our way today. Thanks, everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lindsay. And thanks, everyone. Really great to be here with you all. And thanks so much for joining our session. So as Lindsay mentioned, I would normally be calling in from Vancouver, which is the unceded and ancestral homelands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. Today, I'm calling in from San Diego, from Kimiyeh territory. I'm visiting my brother here, and we'll be visiting family over the next few weeks, but wanted to still offer my gratitude and recognize the territories that I normally call in from, and also give thanks to the land and all of its processes and cycles that sustain us, and all the worlds that it holds, both big and small, and really look forward to sharing the space with you all and exploring more what it means to be doing inner and outer transformation work in the public sector and in our corners of the world where we're all working. So as Lindsay mentioned, as Lindsay mentioned, we are on our first session of the second cycle of the COP. So today we are exploring kind of some foundations of inner and outer transformation in the public sector, sharing some of the questions that we're holding as we're beginning this cycle. And we'll have 2 additional sessions after this. Session 2 is on focusing and hearing from different folks and practitioners from the Vancouver region, and exploring kind of these liminal spaces between the inner and outer worlds, as well as just the liminal space of transformation. And then session 3 will be focusing on convening connections, and some folks from New Zealand, from Aotearoa. Sorry for my pronunciation. So as an invitation, again, building off of what Lindsay mentioned, today we're going to be practicing pushing the boundaries of our own understanding, sharing cross-culturally. Since many of us are coming in from across the world, we have different understandings and different ways of thinking and different perspectives when it comes to this work. Showing up with generosity and our best listening, and being learners, not experts. We're all here with questions and with curiosities, and this is a space to lean into those. So I invite you to do so. I wanted to, before we go into the rest of the session, just take a moment to ground us using a somatic practice. So we'll be just doing a moment just to land us here in the session. I find that as we're doing transformative work and trying to innovate and unlock kind of new directions and new possibilities in our work, it's important to bring our bodies along with us in that process, knowing that there's an inner transformation that also can occur at the body level. So you're welcome to have your camera on or off for this if you'd like. And if there's anything that you would rather not participate in, that's totally fine. Just move at your own pace of your own body. And with that, I invite you can close your eyes or softly focus them in front of you. And take a moment to feel your feet touching the ground or the floor. And feel the seat supporting you. And just check in with yourself. Notice how you're doing in this moment. Notice if there's anywhere where there might be some tension or needs some attention. And also noticing where there's ease. And I'll invite us to just do 3 breaths together. So we'll inhale through the nose and then exhale through the mouth. And as you exhale, see if you can breathe more into the easeful spaces and see if that ease can work its way over to areas where there might need some attention to or tending. So we'll inhale and exhale. Once again, inhale and exhale. One last inhale and exhale. And feel free to move anything that needs to be moved, any stretching you might need to do. And whenever you're ready, you can join us back here, but also encourage you to tend to yourself as we go along in our time together. So we'd love to give you all a chance to just go into some small groups to connect with each other. So just invite you to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're calling in from, and answer the question of what comes to mind when you think of pushing the boundaries in the public sector.
So Lily, someone's going to put everyone into little groups. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, I think Lindsay and Payvan are on it.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's right.
All right.
See you soon. See you soon.
you had a good chance to connect with some folks that maybe you haven't connected with before. And yeah, it's great to that we're kind of building these connections and getting a chance to say hi to folks. So feel free if you want to just write anything quick in the chat that you would like to, that's something that you felt good about from your breakout session. Feel free to do in the chat. And I'm going to continue to move us on. So some things around kind of some aspects that we've been thinking about as we prepare for this session, and we're thinking about what it might take to transform public sector systems, knowing that we're facing increasing pressures to address various complex challenges such as climate change, growing inequity, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in various parts of the world, and many other challenges that have demanding scales and rates in which we need to address these. And we also know that we have these strong ambitions and aspirations and values, and there's kind of a gap in figuring out how we might be able to implement these, and how do we actually work at the kind of structural and systemic level to actually enact these changes and different futures that we imagine. So as we're thinking about the work that's needed when it comes to inner and outer transformation, here's some facets that we've been thinking about. So doing this kind of work requires us working at multiple and interconnected levels between people and systems, and it's kind of individual people or individual kind of aspects, as well as the relationship between these larger systems and structures. It's also around scaling deep, so things like procedure structures in terms of procedures, processes, mechanisms, relational between people, place, each other, into the relationship to the challenges that we're facing, temporal in terms of connecting time, connecting past, presents, and futures, and fractal as in working both at different scales, kind of small and large, and working in these different patterns that we know we need to be kind of repatterning. And there's also an element of pace, where we're needing to be moving and acting and working with the urgency of these challenges, while also taking time to slow down and understand what it is that's happening and what it is that's needed for each moment. So there's a lot of moving, unfreezing, unlearning, repatterning, dancing in these spaces. So we're just kind of holding that we're reckoning with a lot, and also that this work is often done in seemingly kind of impossible or difficult circumstances. We face a lot of constraints in the public sector in terms of what the current system has set up for us. It's hard to imagine what else is possible. So just acknowledging the constraints and challenges that we also face when trying to do this work. And some questions that have been guiding this cycle that we're kind of thinking about in the beginning is just how have different people conceptualized and approached this kind of work? What kinds of forms does inner and outer transformation work take? So what does it look like? What does it feel like? And for folks that are kind of guiding people along these processes, what are we actually inviting people into when undertaking this work? How do we bring them along? How do we support them from wherever they might be? These are kind of the questions that are guiding this cycle. And what we're going to do is hear from a few folks and just a bit more about their work and their practice to kind of help us with some insights. Penny, Ingrid, and Derek have each prepared a slide that has an image on it, or a couple images that reflect some things about what this work means for them and what their practices might look like. And then you'll notice kind of following each of the slides is a space for you all to write in any questions or impressions you might have. So we'll be looking at those as we go along, and each of the folks who's about to present will do some weaving of whatever the person who went before them had said. And so, yeah, you can follow along kind of in the slide deck as well. So I will kick it off and hand it to Penny. And I am going to have to keep a bit of an eye on the time, just so that you might hear me interrupting you, and apologies for if it's disruptive, but got to keep things moving. So working at pace. But I will hand it over to Penny to share about her image.
Awesome, kia ora. Thanks, Lily. I've had 2 coffees and it's like 10 a.m. in the morning here, so I'm ready to race through this. So I'm just going to try and draw on some of Lily's nice calm energy to stay a little bit grounded in the conversation. So first of all, kia ora koutou. My name's Penny. I'm based in Tamaki Makaurau in Aotearoa. Tamaki Makaurau is Auckland, and it's can be translated as the place that's desired by many, or a place of 100 lovers, and that really speaks to the abundance and beauty of this area, and multiple people, whakapapa, mana whenua, connect to this place. So it's a very vibrant kind of central part of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm coming from the Auckland Co-Design Lab, where we sit as I guess we could talk about ourselves as a public sector capability team inside local government, connected to communities, and then working with multiple central government partners. Some of the team, Jess is online today. Unfortunately, Angie Tanaidi, who's the co-director of the lab alongside me, we work in a co-directorship reflecting Tiriti o Waitangi, a relationship between Māori and the Crown, is unwell and is unable to join us, but will be connecting in with us in the 3rd cycle, where we're really grounded in some examples and work specifically from here. So we'll be able to rejoin into more of the kind of specifics of what it means to work in Aotearoa, New Zealand in that 3rd cycle. But I have some friends, Jess and Serena, joining me today as well, which is awesome to share with you a little bit. So our job is to work with public sector teams. We're part of the public sector. To try and, I guess, repattern those public systems so that ideally they're producing equitable outcomes rather than compounding inequity through the way that the various different structures and processes and things work. And we want to collapse the distance between the realities for families and the decision-making and investment processes that happen inside government, often a long way away from those families. So what I wanted to do today is just share with you kind of how our thinking has moved to how we might support that kind of systems transformation, and what our role might be and how we might kind of tackle that. And in particular, how we're thinking about holding and kind of knitting the worlds of personal change within that system and system level change. So what's the connectivity and the relationship between those things, and how we kind of approach it. So the lab's been around for about 8 years, and thankfully, we've evolved and learned a few things over that time about how we might do this work. And we've tried things like, when we were first set up, the emphasis was on go out and do some innovation projects and kind of come back with ideas about how things might be different. We've run a number of capability development programs with public sector teams. Both of those things have positives, but they also have challenges with them in terms of how they actually successfully kind of interrupt or shift the patterns or directions of how the system is moving. And we've also had success with getting things like policy change, but just getting the policy change doesn't mean that actually turns into shifting how the system operates necessarily. So as we've kind of experimented with these different ways of trying to shift systems and kind of repattern systems for different kinds of outcomes, what we've moved towards is much more of a working alongside. And so we're seeking ways to actively work with public servants who are in the middle of trying to implement change. But we're acknowledging that flow of working in the public sector is almost like a kind of freight train. Like, you can't really intervene and go, oh, just let you just stop and think about doing it over here. Like, that momentum is so powerful. And so my image here is talking into that kind of flow and that movement that happens when the system's kind of doing its work and it's enacting its energies and its forces, and we're moving along in our kind of the flow of the work. And what does it look like for us to come alongside that and add a parallel stream of work that's a learning and reflection stream? So instead of kind of bringing people away from that and saying, come and do some different stuff with us, or trying to do an initiative and push it back into this flow, we're trying to integrate into the flow, but create space within it so that people can start thinking about doing things differently, start reflecting, having moments where they can pause and go, not just what are we delivering, but also why are we doing it this way? How are we doing it? How do we want to work together? And acknowledge that how we practice influences the outcomes just as much as kind of what we're doing. So it creates the space for us to think differently whilst we're kind of traveling in momentum. So this is sort of our latest experiment of learning partnership and learning in parallel. So this idea of supporting public sector to deliver change, but working alongside them to create a learning stream that sits in parallel, and creating spaces where people can reflect, unpack, and potentially then shift the trajectory of that momentum because they've had time to do some thinking and going a bit more deeply into the why and the how, and then coming back in to affect that change. So this is kind of a macro picture. This is us zoomed out looking at the scale of a system. And when we look at that flow and energy, the system kind of creates itself. It's got its own forces. It's a bundle of structures, processes, mindsets, heart sets, politics, like it's all sorts of things weaved in together at this kind of macro level. And it's full of people consciously or unconsciously perpetuating patterns and ways of working and kind of enacting on things. So we're trying to give spaces and moments for pause and reflection to say, what is it that we're actually enacting on? What is it that we're perpetuating as we're delivering and kind of on this, sometimes what feels like a treadmill? To have those pause moments, you've got to kind of go deep and start to untangle what is actually in this flow. And you're untangling those relationships between policy and structure and legislation and mindset and value. You've got to look at history, future, present. You're kind of going deep into what's actually happening in the system, and you're starting to unpack it. And when you do that, you start to see that who you are, and that also matters. And the micro focus becomes each of us. So instead of looking at the macro lines, we can look at all the faces that are on this awesome Zoom call and go, oh, it's each of us individually inside there doing our thing, being ourselves. And that requires, when we get to that level, that's suddenly a really vulnerable space where we start to interact between the relationship of who we are in the work, how we work, where we come from, our own experiences, perspectives, worldviews, a whakapapa, and the relationship between that and how we're acting in the system and what we're influencing and perpetuating. Not everybody who chooses to do systems work signs up for that deep part, for that part. They want to do the change work, but do you want to do the bit where you go deep and suddenly it's just as much about you and your relationship to the system and each other? I'm just about at time, so I'm just going to do the last little bit, which is the way we hold that is to create a sort of learning infrastructure, a platform, which helps people to do that deep looking, but as a network. So we're networked across the lines. We're not holding people individually to have that reflection. We're doing it as a network, which means there's more points across the system when we come back up to do the shifting at scale. But also it means when we're in the deep work, we're doing it as a network, which gives us courage, bravery, and we help each other out in those moments of vulnerability. So the platform, the learning platform approach holds the whole of system view. It says this is the work we're doing as a system, this kind of macro momentum, but it also holds space for us individually, the faces down the side of the Zoom or wherever you've got your face set up. It holds space for us to have the micro of actually who are you in this and what do you need to keep energized and keep going. So we try and create an infrastructure that connects the tension between the macro view of the system and the micro experiences of us, of people, and what we bring to it. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm thinking that in our third session, if not later on today, we can get more into, well, how do you invite people into this kind of flow. But I'm going to pass it now to Ingrid to share her whakaaro on this. Kia ora.
Thanks very much, Penny, and hello, everybody. I am here today from the country of the Jinnabara in the hinterland of Meanjin, Brisbane, Australia. And you might hear some background tweets, not of the variety that you have to write, but of the real bird variety. I'm sitting in an amazing rainforest space where I'm lucky enough to call home. I am the director of the Griffith Centre for Systems Innovation. We sit inside a university, but we're an experiment of a university to try and be outward facing. So we're not researchers, we are practitioners, and we work with a variety of organisations, and particularly in the public sector, to really try and accelerate how we move towards transition to more just and sustainable futures. We work particularly in 3 areas, and they're all innovation areas. So we work in the space of civic innovation, which is how do we actually create the infrastructures for communities to participate in and take control of their own futures. How do we innovate on institutions and in institutions, because so many of our institutions are not necessarily fit for purpose for the transition. And then how do we create resources flow towards the transition, so systems capital. My image is, it can be interpreted in multiple ways. I start with the bottom of the image. It's a fire. And I think we're in a fire, in a metaphorical fire, in multiple ways in the Australian context. It reflects our climate, our extreme climate change that we're experiencing almost on a daily basis already, with multiple fires across the continent this summer, but also incredible floods and cyclones. So lots of natural systems shifts that are occurring. But we're also in a cultural fire, and many of you will be aware that we had a referendum last year, which was to vote on whether our First Nations people would have a voice to Parliament, and that was rejected by the Australian public. And I think this has put us in a space where we need to walk into a different way of engaging with our First Nations people, but with each other. What does it mean to be in a post referendum society now, where things are culturally shaken to their core? As a non-Indigenous person, I have a responsibility to walk into that fire, and it is a fire. I draw on Donna Haraway's staying with the trouble very frequently at this moment of time. And I think for people in the public sector here, this is a time of reckoning, because nobody's really quite sure of what is going to happen with the sort of systemic work that has been undertaken over decades now, and all of that feels on shaky ground. So the things I'd like to reflect on are, firstly, that the work of systems change, we need to really I'm feeling the sense that we really need to distinguish between the work and the platforms or spaces in which we work right now, because those platforms are changing and shifting, and yet the work, the deep work, has to go on. So a lot of the conversations that we're involved in and deeply part of as part of our public sector facing work involve the difficulty of staying connected to the work whilst the spaces on which we work are fundamentally changing. I think the other thing I would say is it's really very clear right now how the systems that we work in are reflected in the everyday practices in which we work, and how the system external to us is reflected or can be reflected in our relationships within that work context. So I think about, for example, some of the conversations we've had in our child protection system. And, you know, child protection is an incredibly fraught system in the Australian context, in a colonial context. And, you know, one of the things that we're grappling with is how do we do the everyday practice inside a system that is, you know, if I name it, it's violent. You know, one very senior person said, you know, we make children safer but more damaged. That's the reality of the system that we're working in. You know, how do we grapple with the micro violences as well as the macro violences of those systems? And how do we, you know, I hesitate to say safe, because I feel that lets us off the hook sometimes, but how do we stay fierce and courageous and make sure that everyone stays in that conversation? So it is a level of safety, but sometimes I think safety becomes a space in which we're not able to adopt the fierceness that needs to be adopted in response to some of the systemic issues. The last thing I'd say, I think I'm close to time, is that a lot of the work we're involved in is, you know, Indy Johar, who many of you will know, refers to the boring revolution. We feel like we're revolutionaries in the boring revolution. A lot of the work that we do is about the so-called boring spaces, which are incredibly important in terms of how we move forward in this fire. So for me, the boring parts are those little sparks, and, you know, we try and occupy some space to look at, say, how we can change procurement or change clauses in our procurement processes so that we can open up spaces for equity. And, you know, in a lot of ways, we've been very successful in doing that in the Australian context, but sometimes the sparks go out as well. And so that's when we need to stay with, okay, the work is different from the spaces. The work needs to continue even though our sparks go out. The other spaces are, you know, last night I was reflecting on some work with colleagues around how do we organize, and, you know, that translates into governance, which everybody shuts down and goes to sleep when we talk about governance in a lot of contexts. But, you know, the governing frameworks that we're grappling with don't open up opportunities very often for people, diverse people, to come together and govern something. So what does governance look like in contexts like the post-referendum world that we live in here in Australia? So yeah, my reflections are very much about recognizing that this work is long, It's deep on many levels. Those sparks can go in and out, but the fire to really work towards justice and equity continues in various shapes and forms.
Thank you, Ingrid. I just want to apologize for all the pinging that was happening on my end. I think I cleared it up now, but yeah, thank you so much, Ingrid, for your words and for naming some real important characteristics of the systems that we're working in and trying to shift. I'm going to pass it over to Derek for our last share, and then we can continue our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Lily. Hard to follow those two, but great reflections. My name is Derek Masselink. I'm calling in from the Hulkamanim speaking People's Territory on Vancouver Island, specifically from Chemainus, where my family and I reside. I'm currently a public servant with the British government of British Columbia. Currently, and I always think of my work as temporary, kind of building off of what Ingrid was saying, is like so much change. And currently I'm working in the Ministry of Citizen Services, which is really a corporate ministry within the BC government that provides support to other ministries so that they can do their work more effectively. And I'm working in the digital space and leading a team that's focused on the design and curation of learning to support government improvement efforts. So improving, modernizing our systems so that they're more effective, that they can deliver the things that citizens both expect, but we're more effective in the way that we're doing the work. And my career has been both inside and outside of government. This is my I call my second tour with government. I came back in 2016 after 20 years away to work with the Ministry of Agriculture to support the agricultural sector and also to support my family in getting this farm. And what I discovered, I left government 20 years before, sort of working in the environmental field and working on treaty negotiations, and had been sort of like, this isn't changing fast enough. I don't like what I'm seeing. I feel like I'm repeating the mistakes of the past as we were having these discussions with Indigenous nations and their communities. And I went back to school and found myself sort of doing change-related work at the university, and then finding myself back in government 20 years later, kind of with a different perspective on both how to see the work, but also how to actually maintain myself in that work and maintaining my ability to, and that fire. Ingrid, I think you were speaking about how do I maintain my fire, even though I might not agree with what's being done or how we're pursuing it, and how do I do it in a way that I'm not actually contributing to the dysfunction, that I'm actually improving things, that I can go to sleep at night, that I can feel like I'm actually making a difference, and I'm helping people in that work. So I work in government. I also teach at a university. I teach governance for sustainability with students. I'm active in my community. I farm. I'm a beekeeper. And I think in all my work, the one pattern that emerges is really my foundation of both my knowledge, like where I came from. I was raised by a forester and a social worker who instilled in me this love for the environment, but also this responsibility or love for community and love for people. and that showing up in a way that was both sort of an appreciation of the wisdom that's inherent in systems, and especially in natural systems, but also in cultural or family systems, ones that had been well supported, is something that was like really important to draw from. And so my first image, I'm the rule breaker, I guess, in the crowd. I couldn't narrow it down to one image, but I always think of like my ideal situation or system as a forest system, a healthy forest system, where there's so much complexity that that isn't necessarily visible to us, but it's present in helping that forest maintain its integrity and resilience over time. And it changes. It may not change in remarkable ways, but it can go through sort of what we would call sort of step changes. But it has this ability to kind of return to an equilibrium. But it does this in ways that they don't have governance systems. They don't have, there's not necessarily language that we would understand. It's not organized in the way that we understand things. And it has this remarkable way of sort of moving towards better, towards health. That's just inbuilt. And so in my work, I'm always like, how do I conduct myself, or how do I organize ourselves that we're more like a forest, less like a bureaucracy, less like a machine? How do I show up, or what do we do so that we're functioning more like a healthy ecosystem? What does that look like? And I think that's a really difficult thing to achieve. I'm also constantly looking. I'm as much a learner, and I think I maintain this attitude of learning. Penny, I think the work that you're doing is like also just being constantly appreciative and surprised by the wisdom and brilliance that's available to us. And one of those places that I sort of learn the most, which I can bring back to the office to try in the work that I do around change making, is the work, the farm. And right now it's beekeeping, and I'm learning so much through sort of the care and cultivation of these organisms. Again, about how they come together to support each other, to deal with change. And they do this in ways that are not necessarily overt or prescribed or inbuilt. And realizing that, life has a way of doing this, and doing this over millennia, in the case of bees, over millions of years. And there's so much kind of, again, wisdom, but also, I think, when I'm struggling at the office, all I have to do is go back to the hives to sort of get re-inspired and recommitted to how do I take more of the natural environment and bring it in the wisdom that's inherent in that, and bring it back to the office, so to speak. The third image is, I think, the way that I'm showing up now. Before, I was more kind of showing up like, how do I make transformative change? Even the work that I was doing at the university is trying to equip my students with the ability to practice their agencies, to take what was available, to actually make the shifts that these important big time shifts that need to be made. I think over time, I'm getting more behind the idea of that change happens incrementally through small actions over time, and a dedication to, and this fierce commitment to getting better. And so I put, one of sort of the coaches that's inspired me in his work, just by the way he shows up, Pete Carroll, sort of the the original Ted Lasso, I think. As a person who brings that kind of attitude and as well as this commitment to better. And that's not about just competition for the sake of competition. It's like, how do we improve the lives of our players so that they not only perform on the field, but they're performing at home and they're successful in their lives. And so taking more of a holistic approach, helping people, and the way that I'm working with, I'm looking literally at a team level now with my staff of how do I support them so that they're more effective, that we're more effective in the work. I will say that sometimes I wonder what we're doing, but I'm reminded again about how we show up and how we embrace the work actually can have a transformative effect on others. It can have an effect on others by the way that we're doing that. So acting, I guess, more like a coach or a gardener or a beekeeper about like, what are the things that I can do that are within the span of my control, my span of influence, that are actually, in an immediate sense having an impact, but are also kind of revealing ways of bringing people together in order to do things that are more effective, and potentially transformative over time. I would also, can I just say one?
Yeah, one more thing. Go for
it. One more thing.
Yeah.
Is that I see, government it's a construct. It's a construct, and I would think, back to what Ingrid was saying, is that it's a colonial construct. And I think what I'm sitting with right now is how to show up in that space, understanding that the world, the kinds of structures that we have around us probably actually need to be dismantled or reimagined, and how to do that in a kind, deliberative way so that people actually can find their way through that experience to something that's, more like a forest.
Thanks so much, Derek and Ingrid and Penny, for sharing your insights and your practices. There's so much in there that I feel like we just need so much time to discuss, but I'm glad we have a few cycle sessions to do so. And at this time, I wanted to invite folks into breakout rooms again, just to reflect and discuss from what's coming up from what's just been shared. So pick something that one of the speakers shared that really connected for you and why, and how does it connect or not connect into your world and work. We'll go into some breakout discussion, and then we'll come back and hear a bit more broadly from folks. Welcome back from your discussion time. Probably cut you off a little bit mid your greatest thought, so apologies for that. We wanted to give you a moment on slides 20 and 21. You can just take some time to gather any thoughts or insights or things you're really sitting with, and you can put those into the boxes that are there, just to kind of gather some of those impressions and reflections that you're having so far. And after that, we'll move into hearing a bit from folks about what's kind of coming up for you, or what were some things that you traversed in your practice. So slides 20 and 21, you can enter in some thoughts there. I'll give you a minute to do so. Also, if you're not feeling the slide deck and you want to just add the notes into the chat, that's fine too. Some things people are saying so far, flowing between the fierceness and the flow. The boring revolution, my new tagline. Reminder that lived experience in these institutions need the space to lead and create and have these visions. Paradigm shifts at pace, but pace of lived experience, harm, or pace of our collective learning. Inner and outer work takes vulnerability and courage. What other ways of showing up or roles are available to us from beekeeper, gardener, coach, jester, conductor? Thanks, folks, for sharing your insights. Feel free to keep writing. I might invite, if anyone wants to share verbally, can also open it up for that. I was told that I'm allowed to pick on a few people in kicking us off. So I might pass it over to Serena if you have any thoughts or would like to share anything from your time.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge the three speakers and all your immense wisdom and just really appreciate your time. For me, I had really, really key themes. I think all three interlinked between each other. I think, Penny, you showed reflexivity, self-awareness, and observing the system, and that self-awareness and kind of the ability to go in and look in and provide humanity even in complexity is a key part of how we navigate our future. Well, for you, Ingrid, I really observed the energy of your, we call it kaitiaki protection and fierceness of protecting those lived experiences and having that energy to show up within that microaggressions and those little moments as much as those big moments. And how do we make that happen? And how do you resource that energy to keep being relentless in that pursuit? Well, and Derek, your last speaker was much about like an ecological approach, and I really appreciate your ability to kind of constantly be reconnected and see the wisdom within systems. And for me, all three about the resourcing of flow and reflexivity and a radical energy and seeing the big picture and seeing the wisdom in that, I think really have a really great synergy about how we should really approach things really in its emergence and its kind of chaos state. So for me, I think the main questions I really had was, as we are learning and growing, which is a lot of the questions I said, we are having harm, we're in institutions that create harm now, passively, institutionally, historically. So what pace are we expected as allies of people to participate in this healing and this doing when harm has been created and we are accountable to healing that harm as much as building an aspirational future? And if we are building that aspirational future, are we the ones to lead it? What is our relationality to that leadership? That's all I had to say.
Kia ora, Serena.
Yeah, thank you so much for those reflections, Serena. I'm definitely sitting with the something that Ingrid said about safety, and something that I've been hearing too in other spaces that I practice in is just kind of like noticing in the body the difference between what it feels like to show up in a safe space versus a brave space, and what moves are available when we're coming from a place of bravery and like having like an embodied sense of bravery, knowing that safety can be so different for everyone, and it's really, really hard to guarantee safety for everyone. And it's such a like an internal kind of navigation space too for ourselves in terms of what it means to cultivate safety within ourselves. Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that too. So thank you for that. I might pick on someone else, and then if anyone would like to also just raise their hand or share anything, you're more than welcome to. But I wanted to see if Jess Trask has anything that she'd like to share.
Thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
I was really thinking a lot about the metaphors of fire and sparks and forests. You know, they're kind of drawing on the natural elements that were weaved in across the different corridor. Yeah, I really loved what Ingrid was saying around the kind of the long haul of the work and the depth of it, you know, and the kind of preparation. Yeah, how you prepare yourself is very different, right, for something that's very short and intense versus, you know, the long, what we know about how this change happens over time. So I loved Derek's kōrero about the maintaining the fire and the, you know, the spark within yourself and the relationship to the work. And for me, that connected with what Penny was saying around that kind of cultivation of that deeper wisdom and the kind of the deepening, the internal deepening that's happening, the mindsets and heart sets chat around how we connect to that work, what's in it for us, that's the real hook, the thing that really makes the difference. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I loved Derek's kōrero around beekeeping and gardening and that kind of tending, the nature of that tending work. I guess it's quite in contrast to the, you know, the nature of crown systems and how and the you know, the relationship of power within them. So I loved all those visuals, and can see Derek out there in the garden kind of surrounded by bees harvesting and then gifting the honey. So yeah, it was really kind of beautiful. Thank you.
Getting stung, making mistakes.
Thank you. I see Zinnia with her hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
I appreciated many parts of what the different speakers brought. One piece that Penny mentioned just briefly is working on repatterning public systems, and in particular the connection between families and the decision making that impacts them. When we're talking about pushing the boundaries externally, I'm curious about sort of like, how do we push the boundaries in terms of engaging directly with the folks that are influenced by the decisions that are made in the public sector. I don't know if anybody wants to. That's what I'm interested in.
Anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting reflection. And, I think just thinking about some of what Derek and Penny were saying, I don't think we can do systems work without looking at it as we're working in an ecosystem. So if you don't have lived experience voice, then you're not actually doing systems work. So I think you've raised a really important point that, and maybe using one of Derek's metaphors, we're tending an ecosystem. We're not restructuring a system that sits outside relationships and relationality.
Yeah, active. I think, yeah, what little I've learned is like active engagement is so critical. And I think the other thing that comes up is by being actively engaged. And so the middle picture, if you recall, there was a bee that had a number on it. So that was queen number 34. It was my first queen she lived 4 years without treatments. If you know anything about bees these days, they're being affected by environmental conditions. They aren't supposed to survive for that long without kind of like incredible micromanagement. And so she was taught me a lot about don't assume that people know what they're talking about, because often our system it looks at it from certain angles. I mean, just like we're learning about forests, they're interconnected, they communicate. The wood wide web is a thing. There's so much that we don't know that we think we know, and by engaging in these systems like learners, looking for these opportunities that may be hidden or that may have been perceived incorrectly, is it's the only way you can find out is challenging sort of the status quo or the status knowledge, like what we consider right now, likely will be disproven. Our level of knowledge is only at a certain level, and is really constricted or constrained by kind of all sorts of structures, the way that things have been considered. So I think that's what excites me. When somebody says like something's impossible, it's like, really? Because how many movies did they have to make about those kind of stories? Is like, we thought this was impossible, or it wasn't true, and actually there's something there. But it's a hard thing in a system when you're the one who's like, really? It's really hard. It's hard work to carry that, to be the person, because you're often seen as an outsider, as the disruptor, as the problem in a system that wants everybody like to get along. These are the norms and requirements. We want everybody to behave the same way, because if they don't, and there's reasons for that, but we're really like impacted by rules. Like we like structure. There's a strong attachment to structure because it gives us clarity in a messy world. And so finding a way of challenging that, but challenging that in a way that's helpful. I think that's been my career, basically. How do you keep throwing yourself at the wall in a way that's helpful, and that you're not harming people, but you're doing it more effectively each time you throw yourself at it.
Thanks, folks. Just wanted to name something that Serena wrote in the chat too. I guess the theme we are traversing is power in context of innovation, particularly in the public sector, because lived experience is always have been leading even when we're not looking, and Indigenous knowledge is founded through these systems. Thank you so much to everyone. I really wish that we had like 2 more hours together to talk and go through all these really deep insights that everyone has. Yeah, if there's anything else that you would like to add into the chat or into the slides, you're more than welcome to come back to these. I just wanted to, let's see, go back into here. There's a lot of really great insights in here that you join us for our next sessions. So we have another session coming up on March 12th on liminal spaces in Vancouver, Muslim territories. We'll have special guests Shagupta, Maggie Larato Chandoma, and Laura Pearsall. And then our third session, Convening Connections, which is on April 2nd. And if anyone wants to, I've got just one more parting gift for us. If anyone wants to stay on a couple minutes afterwards, if you have any questions about the community of practice in general, you're more than welcome to. But with this, I think I'll move us into our close. A little gift of a reading. And also I realized I didn't, in my attempt to get out of the way, I didn't really introduce who I was. So, but I work in systems transformation, and I'm currently working in the Solutions Lab at the City of Vancouver, which is a public sector innovation unit within the city, and have worked a lot with Lindsay and Maggie and really great folks here on figuring out how we transform systems while acting in the public sector. So you'll hear more from me in the second session, but to name who I was. I'm going to share a reading from this book called Locate Your Liberate by Taylor Shanae, who describes herself as a healer, mother, and living body. And she's also a somatic practitioner and Black feminist, and worked on healing racialized trauma within the body and on individual and collective liberation. So I just want to read one passage from her, and then I'll let you all go. So this is from the epilogue of this book. Adrienne Marie Brown has said time and again that our attention is one of our most valuable resources. To take our attention back from the ways it is held hostage by capitalism, white supremacy, extractivism, and dominance is a radical act of immediate liberation. Deciding that to which we then pay our attention is a process of discernment, an active daily prayer to gift our human awareness to places and spaces and peoples and more than human kin that can benefit from the bounty of our attention. Whether we grant our attention to feeling, moving, or dreaming, we are returning our most precious possession back into the material substance of our lives. And that, in and of itself, is liberatory. The discernment process then asks, what is another element of life that beckons me and my attention? What do I want to love? The wind, the water, the birds, the elements, the stars. How can my attention, regained from systems of dominance and oppression, be used in service to a more liberated world? And as I cast my attention with intention, what do I learn about myself? How am I changed by the things I grant my attention toward? Your attention is incredibly valuable. It creates, feeds, and grows the world we occupy. Liberation is a direct result of embodied attention. Gather your attention back, my friends. Locate your liberate. With you in love and madness, Taylor Shanae. That's from her epilogue. So with that, thank you so much to everyone. And we really look forward to continuing these conversations and yeah, seeing where else we might travel to, where else we might flow to. Have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are. And we'll see you again on the 12th of March.